Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis. I'm the founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, and this is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about their journey, and you can expect to get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting. We are a boutique recruiting firm that works in tech and games and values quality over quantity. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a thank you to Adam Lieb for introducing us and GameSpeed for also introducing us. That is a great show for you to attend this year. Today we have David Vogelpohl with us. David is the CMO at FastSpring, which is a platform that enables direct-to-consumer monetization for video games and other digital products. David leverages over 2 decades of experience with advanced digital marketing, influencer marketing, and monetization to help FastSpring's gaming customers monetize and market games direct to consumer. Let's get started. David, I'm glad we could make it and none of our kids are sick and we are well. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Lizzie. So glad to be here.
I would love for you to start with a bit deeper dive into what FastSpring is and how it relates to games.
Yeah, absolutely. So FastSpring is a payment platform. We've been around for about 20 years. We're what's known as a merchant of record. And what that means is that we provide local, global payments and compliance all in one platform. So in other words, you can sell all around the world and be tax compliant in all the places that you sell. So that's basically what FastSpring does. And we support game publishers with direct-to-consumer monetization by powering payments and e-commerce experiences on their website.
And what percent of your current revenue is games, and where do you see that going? I know you have a big gaming hire.
I did a podcast one time where if they asked like insider data that we don't share, that I'd have to take like a shot of hot sauce. So we don't share the specifics, but it is a healthy double-digit percentage of our revenue.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. FastSpring was founded, like I said, 20 years ago. It was actually founded by the original creators of the Picasso software, which eventually became Google Photos.
Oh,
FastSpring has a strong heritage in digital software, SaaS, and other types of digital products, empowering payments and subscriptions for them. We've had gaming customers in various flavors since nearly the dawn of FastSpring, and in the last few years have really accelerated by winning a few key publishers and have really strengthened our offering around that, including hiring some new folks and expanding in those ways. So that's a little bit of background on FastSpring and game.
yeah. And can you start? Would love to hear a briefing on the current state of direct-to-consumer monetization in 2025.
All right. I think it depends on what part of the game industry you're in and how you think about that a little bit. But in direct to consumer, where the majority of action seems to be, is within mobile gaming and specifically live service games. What we see are publishers creating web shop experiences on their website and leveraging their voice with their players outside of the game in order to convince them to engage with the brand on their website, and then ultimately to use the web shop to transact to buy things like virtual currencies and in-game items and things like that. From a regulatory perspective, what we've seen in the US are lawsuits by Epic with Google and Apple with different levels of outcomes that you could view as being publisher friendly. The most optimistic thing we're seeing now, we're still waiting to see how they'll implement it, is perhaps the ability to do what's called steering with inside mobile games, where you could basically put a link to your shop in the game without paying additional fees or much additional fees. That's still being worked out in the US, and similar type kind of give and puts are happening in Europe with the Digital Markets Act. We're also seeing things heat up in Japan and other jurisdictions like that. So that's the state of D2C, if you would, Lizzie.
Yeah, tell me about the different regions. I mean, what goes on in Asia? Obviously, I feel like everyone's pretty familiar with the Apple lawsuit here, but yeah, how are their strategies different? What is allowed in different regions, and how might one region's laws start to influence another's?
I mean, right now, if you say what's allowed with direct to consumer with Apple or Google, you're going to get a list of, well, in Europe you can do this, and we think you're going to be able to do that, and Apple said you could do this, but we think regulators are going to think that's not far enough, and we've seen this
Yeah,
play out in all of these places. What I suspect it could be that the mobile platforms do play this kind of whack-a-mole game around the world where they allow things in some places and not others. But what I would hope and where they may land is kind of one unified view of how to approach it. It is so nuanced in terms of the regional differences. You have Google dealing with their antitrust issues in the US and what could come of that. So it's very, very complicated. But what I would hope for and where they may land is kind of unified approach around the world, which is a little more publisher friendly in terms of what folks are allowed to do, but still preserving the core value of what Apple and Google provide, because it's huge what they provide in terms of the marketplace and the trust that it provides.
yeah,
And so finding that balance, I think, is what our digital world and mobile is really going through right now. And there's some growing pains there. But it's such a nuanced story.
yeah. I'll have to see. A lot of questions for 2025. And if I were to set up my own web shop from scratch, you can come at it from the angle, probably both. If I'm an indie dev and I think I have a great game versus I have a established publisher and people know who I am. But what best practices should I think about if I'm starting to enter this space with or without a historical customer base?
Yeah, I mean, the first question you're going to ask is, well, how am I currently distributing my games, and how might a web shop play a role in that? Am I only on Steam and PC gaming? Might I need an installer if I go with my own web shop? Could I resell Steam keys? Am I mobile only in live services? And how might I approach that in terms of like how it would integrate with your shop and what offers and things like that are available? I think the number one thing, though, if we think about it, earlier I mentioned kind of how mobile live service games tend to be the highest revenue within the direct to consumer universe. And if we look at games like that, one of the critical things that's kind of a criteria before you even build the shop is you need to have some level of direct relationship with your players. In today's environment, without paying additional fees to the mobile publishers, you can't link directly to your web shop in your game. So this means you need some way to communicate with them outside of the game. So if you're a publisher that has fans of your business and fans of your games that connect with you on Discord, or maybe they follow your social media profiles, maybe you have things like esports events or other things that are happening outside the context of the game itself. These are all opportunities to share with your players the experiences they might be able to get on your website. Things like a web shop that might have better deals than maybe what they're seeing in game, but also other experiences you might have on your shop. Certainly games where there are creators that are making content around the game and can say things like, go get a 10% boost on gems if you go to the web shop to buy gem packages and things like that. These are all things that are going to be really helpful. So the shop itself and building the shop is technology. It's not that hard. There's like a
Yeah.
bunch of different ways you can go about it. But I think
Yeah.
like having that core fan base is going to be really critical to your success as you think about D2C.
And you mentioned influencers. Do you feel like that's one of the primary strategies today for driving people to your web shop?
Um, it's part of a blended mix of how publishers are approaching promoting their web shops. Some are quite specific about it. So You mentioned Adam Leave. Adam's such a great person. Adam introduced me actually to someone named Justin Sachs, who runs
Yeah,
a company.
Nexus.
Yeah, Nexus.
He's
I
one of
think
my
he's been
podcasts
on.
too. Yeah.
I was gonna say he might have been on your podcast, and it's really interesting because yes, absolutely, folks will lean into the kind of creator side of the universe because it's such a, you'll see creators that have challenges like I'm going to spend X dollars and try to achieve Y in the game. These are moments where they can mention that better deals or creator codes that can be used redeemed for discounts on the web shop in addition to like the standard discounts people will offer there, and reward those creators with payback for referencing that. So it's a big part of promoting web shops is the creator side. I think it depends on the publisher whether that would be like the number one way or not. What I've experienced and seen for publishers that are the most successful with this are those that kind of have a holistic view of how they're communicating with their players outside of the game and thinking about their website as a destination beyond just the shop and better deals.
Yeah.
But how do they own that relationship with their players?
How would you go about making it a destination? Like, yeah, having 10% deal is one thing, but what would be so appealing that I'm like, I have to go here. I can't miss it, right?
One of the lessons I've learned in a little over 25 years in optimizing digital experiences is that we're often playing a balance between suffering and joy. So in the mobile universe, we know that we can't link to our store directly without paying additional fees. And so when you talk about making your website a destination, what you're talking about is putting content in your website that's not in your game. And when we talk about a leaderboard, like why not just load the leaderboard in the game? Why make me go to the website? Maybe I load it in the game, but there's a special version on the website. So you're thinking about this balance between like, what am I gating with not putting it in the game versus putting it on my website? And in some cases, it may be better that it lives on your website than in your game. But of course, from your player's perspective, they may have to link out to a browser to experience whatever it is that you're putting there. So it's this balance between suffering and joy. But some of the things that you can leverage on your site to make your site more of a destination, we've talked about leaderboards. Another big one would be tutorials and playthroughs. And I know you don't want to go necessarily too far because creators play a role in that too, and that's super valuable. You might not want to step on their toes too much, but maybe there's some basic tutorials and playthroughs you might want to publish on your site and promote in your game to continue that relationship with your players. You can gate some of that content, maybe to collect an email address and give you the ability to communicate more outside the game. Cheat codes, if that applies to your games, lore content. It depends obviously on the style of game, whether that's relevant or not. And then some publishers will just straight up give you an item for logging into the web shop or something like that, or into the web experience or web portal,
Yeah.
where you'll just straight up get an in-game item or something like that just for logging in, or like a frequency award for doing it every day or something like that.
So there's many different strategies, but you have to make it appealing to go through the hurdle of getting out of the game and linking somewhere outside.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's the like, I don't know, it's the pragmatic way of thinking about the balance between like where you're putting your content here or there. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to deliver a really solid player experience. And your website is wholly owned property of yours. It is a place for you to deliver experiences, content, and commerce that allows you to have a direct relationship with your customers. And I think for publishers, often resign that direct relationship because so much of the distribution is happening through controlled marketplaces, if you will. And
Yeah.
so really adopting like it's such an interesting idea in business because of course you have a direct relationship with your customers. These web portals, these web experiences, they start to create the core of that. So as your players transit between platforms over the course of when they play your games or just even over the course of their day, they still have that core relationship with you as a company.
And how does that evolve as a live service game evolves? I mean, what do you really need to think about when you're launching versus the continual engagement? Because that's so much of what we've seen is that games come out, people play them, and then they go back to playing whatever it is they've been playing the whole time. And the metrics just nosedive. How do you keep players engaged from that perspective?
I mean, I could definitely give you all my opinions on player engagement and releases in live service games, but I think from thinking about it from my commerce perspective,
Yeah.
um, what's interesting about live service games and direct to consumer is live service games effectively operate like recurring revenue. Now, granted, the person's not guaranteed to buy the next battle pass or whatever, but by releasing products all the time, you create a recurring revenue stream from your players. Well, in other recurring revenue businesses, you typically would err towards subscriptions in that case. And I know, Warcraft and their games do subscriptions, but for the most part, what we're talking about here are somewhat of microtransactions, or at least transactions of virtual currency can not necessarily be micro. But my point is individual transactions over time, because the player is making a transaction over time and making a decision over time. If you can get them to establish a direct relationship with you as a company and you as a brand and make those transactions on your website, they may do that again for the next transaction. So oftentimes you have a lot of at bats with players to convince them to engage with your brand directly and transact on your web shop. um, and I think the other interesting part of that is not only do you have like this kind of frequency aspect of it, but the other interesting thing about live service games over games that say would monetize through a subscription or a premium game is that players are worth vastly different amounts. So when you have a VIP, of course, that may spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a month on your game, VIPs can make up to 70-80% of your revenue and only be 20% or less of your players. So the really kind of dynamic part about live service games and direct to consumer is you can target a very small amount and have a really big impact on your profitability. Where if you were trying to change the behavior of all of your pet players, that would
Yeah.
be a lot harder and it wouldn't have that kind of scaled impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. So focus, like all business, right, on the 20% that makes up the 80% of whatever the math is.
But on a premium game, that's not necessarily true. Like if, Call of Duty costs $60, every
Right.
player is worth $60.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so if you're not Call of Duty, how do you go about thinking about the right monetization strategy, would you say, for your game and testing that and making sure that it's resonating with the players that you want it to resonate with?
I think, game publishers, as they think about their live services product inventory, what's in it, how much it costs, I feel like in general, they're pretty good at understanding what their players want, testing and iterating and finding the right formula. I think where folks start to feel uncomfortable is like how they coordinate that with what's going on in the web shop and maybe even what's going on cross platform. But at least in the context of the web shop, one of the first things you consider is, well, what is the discount rate going to be? Am I going to offer a discount? Am I going to offer it through the form of like literally lower prices? Or maybe I would be the same price, but get more of things like virtual currency.
Yeah.
And so it's the balance between these that, and in doing this also in a way, because again, like Apple and Google are super valuable partners. So while it's beneficial to establish direct relationships, you also want to do that in a way that's respectful of these other platforms. But it's the balance between like what you're giving in each context to try to incentivize that behavior to not create too much disparate differences between the two experiences that, you come off on unauthentic.
Yeah, and I guess you wouldn't want to be off-putting for the major platforms as well. How do you see that evolving over time? I mean, there's lawsuits, there's new shops popping up, new app stores, like there's Huawei's App Gallery, there's Amazon App Store. How are these impacting the market?
Um, I started my career in 1996, so I have a very long perspective on the internet and digital, at least relatively. And I think of things in the terms of openness. And on my PCs and on my Macs, I can install any software I want and do whatever I want with that computer that I own. in the case of mobile, I don't have that choice. In Google, I do because I can sideload an app. So in that case, I was running Fortnite on my Google Pixel because
Oh,
I could sideload it and sideload the Epic Store in order to do that. And so I think what I hope to see is a push towards openness. Now we're seeing that with regulations and regulators in Europe. We're seeing that with companies like Epic and Spotify kind of pressure testing things with lawsuits. And so, in general, obviously, if you control these gates, it's really valuable to not take a more open approach. But I see the future really evolving to be more open. Again, they'll have growing pains, but that's what I hope. But as we always see in technology, I mean, Apple and Google have effectively a duopoly on phones. And what they usurped in order to get that duopoly were local, effectively duopolies and monopolies from cell carriers. So before Android and iOS, in your market, the person, the entity that controlled the phones and the software that ran on the phones was your cell phone provider. And
right.
so now it's actually the maker of the phone. And so that completely flipped up on its end. And that control was in the hands of the telcos for so long. And now it's in the hands of the phone and operating system manufacturers. It's such an interesting time. So this tug and pull between eyeballs and content, as my first boss on the internet put it, has existed even beyond the context of digital, but it's existed since the very beginning. And so this struggle still rages on, Lizzie.
Yeah, just in a different light.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to launch my game. This is every company. Okay. I have what I think is a good game. I hope that it gets discovered. And this is ultimately the key to my success as a game maker. Um, and there are all these different regulations. And I'm trying to figure out just, how do I launch and how do I get the right people to discover me? What are your 2 cents on just figuring out marketing strategies, figuring out what resonates, figuring out how to monetize in a way where it's still good for the player, right? It's a win-win situation. This is the $1 million question.
Yeah. And I think, like, from a direct to consumer perspective, if you're an early stage publisher, maybe you got funding for your game, you're about to launch it,
Yes.
unless it's like a browser game or something like that, don't mess with direct to consumer right away. Launch on Steam, launch on Apple, launch on Google, launch on different marketplaces, and try to get adoption through there. I mean, the marketplaces have tremendous audiences and eyeballs, and that's a complexity on the direct to consumer side you probably don't want to mess with right away. You want to probably wait till you have a little more scale.
Yeah.
It also depends on, like, how much revenue your game's making now, because you're also thinking about, like, okay, what percentage of it could I potentially convert to D2C? But from a D2C perspective, I would say just wait until you have more of that critical mass,
Yeah.
and experiment by just releasing on platforms and then iterating from there. Game development and creation is not my area of expertise,
Totally.
but
I on the other side.
yeah, release and iterate. Perfection is the enemy of progress,
Yes.
is a great saying. And then another one I love is the first version of everything is the worst version it will ever be. So I think when you release a game, though, you have this moment where people will judge you, right? You do your big release on Steam. So I do think that perfection element's there, but releasing and iterating is how I approach everything. So.
You might need to drink some hot sauce here. I'm not sure, but uh, for a larger publisher, what percent of revenue ballpark are companies looking at for D2C versus a traditional platform? And is there a framework for that? Like at a certain point, you want to try and think about converting XYZ?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a cost of setting up your web shop and maintaining it. And so that'll be different for each org depending on what they want to do. And that cost will create a tipping point, in terms of, like, where you might think about, well, when is it worth it for us or not?
Yeah.
Now, as with everything in business, the cost of the thing isn't the point, it's the profit the thing is going to make. So from your
If
business
you do it right.
perspective, Yeah,
If you get the adoption, yeah.
right. When is it going to be worth it for us to, as executives and as an engineering team or whatever, and even within the product org and monetization org within publishers have got to spend time on this. At what point does it need to be worth it? Now, what our larger publishers will say is, well, when they release and really scale their direct to consumer offerings from scratch, and we have folks who are very far along in their journey where they're getting like 20-30% plus of their revenue. There's many orgs publishers that are getting 50% plus through direct to consumer.
Wow.
And we have others that are very large publishers that haven't like fully launched yet, and their expectation is that it should produce the revenue of like having another hit game. And these are very,
Wow.
very large games the particular publisher
Yeah.
makes. And so that's how they view it. So it should be a significant driver, but that whole, 20-80 rule, 80-20 rule really helps. But you can absolutely get 50% plus of revenue going through your web shop.
Wow. What a perspective of making a whole other hit game.
Right. Yes. And
That's
and like obviously the amount of work to set up a direct to consumer channel is a whole lot less than obviously
okay.
creating.
Yes. I thought I was wondering where you were going to go with that. Yes. A whole lot less than making a game. Every game that comes out and does well
Yeah,
is
and
full.
the other interesting thing we see a lot, when you go to make your web shop, like I kind of dismissed it earlier. I'm like, that's just a web shop. It's not that hard to make, right? But what you'll see a lot of publishers do is they'll leverage some sort of shop in a box approach, like
Yeah.
I'm going to enter my products and I'm going to have a web shop next week or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he'll just start making a bunch of money. And all of a sudden it'll be 15-20% of revenue. And they're like, what do we do? And then they'll think about that next phase. And this is without trying. She's like literally sticking it up on the website. And so I do think there's a lot more opportunity than people realize. I do think there's a lot of like, well, we're going to wait and see how things turn out with the regulations. The way the rules work now, there's a lot of latitude there. And I think it is very reasonable that you should seek a direct relationship with your players. I mean, a business that doesn't have a direct relationship with their customers isn't much of a business.
That's very true. Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. So try now, stick something up, even if it's just out of the box, and see what happens. See what comes almost organically. Like, and then you have it up, and then you have to start trying to figure out what channels are going to be right for you and
Yeah,
your
and you don't have to over engineer it. It could be, 4 virtual currency packages or something that you give it a
yeah.
discount. That's not even a platform. That's a web page with links on it
Yeah.
to buy stuff. Like, you don't have to over engineer the store experience in the beginning. And again, we've seen quite a few examples where people have done it like as a side project and it just like got out of control, but in a good way.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. And that's a great reminder. And that is the enemy of success in business is over engineering and waiting until it becomes perfect and putting so much work into something where, yeah, better to just get it at the door. Great advice. Okay, I want to talk about your own career a little bit and how you got here. And one of my favorite things to ask in the podcast is about mentors that you've had and what they've taught you and kind of what you wish that you knew. What if you could go back 10 years or whatever and tell yourself like, hey, here's this life hack, here's this cheat code. What do you think you might say and where did that come from?
Yeah, mentors. I've had, like I mentioned, kind of started in '96, and I had a lot of good early internet mentors who really taught me about the balance between the control of, in the early days of the internet, it was control of different chunks of the network, and the balance between who controlled that and how commerce was affected within that. And I think it's really informed a lot of my points of view, and even obviously a lot of the work I've done today. One of my really most impactful mentors, and if kind of answering a question, if I could go back 10 years and do something different, but this kind of ties into another mentor, is Heather Brunner, the CEO of a company called WP Engine, who I used to work for. And Heather's an incredible business leader. But also one of the things she's really, really good at is really growing an organization and growing people and really building a culture around professional development and improvement, and kind of like this people first approach. And she was really, really impactful for me as I thought about my management strategy. I'd say prior to that, it was more just like brass tacks and like, let's get stuff done. And
Yeah,
she really helped me see how to incorporate more of that heart into the smarts. And then the
interesting.
last thing, go back 10 years, is just to learn to say no more often. I often say you won't grow until you say no. You need to know what to say yes to. I think we often try to please others and try to make everything work, but really saying no is so critical in business. And I know I've said yes way too much in my career.
Yeah. Yeah, that was our pre-podcast conversation. The power of no, that's my goal for 2025. So if you talk to me and I say no, just expect that I'm going to say no. And if I say yes, maybe even question, Lizzie, I thought you were going to say no. So I have one final question before I ask it. I want to point people to fastspring.com. Are there any teasers, anything that you have to have our audience look forward to from FastSpring? Any big announcements or anything we should pay attention for in the games world coming up?
Yeah. To keep up with everything like gaming related with FastSpring, fastspring.gg actually will get you there. One of our biggest announcements recently was we hired a head of gaming, a gentleman named Chip Thurston, who is a director that came to us from Scopely, formerly of SciPlay, where he was a monetization lead. Chip has extensive experience with live service games, managing them there at Scopely and SciPlay, as well as the orchestration between that and direct to consumer. So we're really excited to have Chip on board to help lead our gaming practice. We do have a roadmap that we've developed for 2025 that we'll be announcing over the course, but I don't have any teasers for you there. But in general, supporting our customers and new customers around helping with global payments and making sure that's done in a way that helps address things like risk, fraud, and helping make sure that players like VIPs transact and have the experiences that are reflective of the value they provide. So yeah, that's pretty much it on my front.
Great. We've been talking to David Vogelpohl, who is CMO of FastSpring. David, where can people go to work with your platform, learn more about you, or chat with you, or maybe have you speak if you're saying yes to those kinds of things right now?
Oh, nice. I actually did say no to one of those things earlier, but like I mentioned, fastspring.gg. Watch for us at various conferences. We'll be at GDC in March. We'll be at Pocket Gamer Connect London in January, and then various events throughout the year. And then if you'd like to check me out, you can look me up on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/D Vogelpohl. And then you can find me on X at OMG It's DV.
That's the best. And Vogelpohl is Vogelpohl.
Yes, yes.
Why?
Your audience doesn't know how to spell my last name. Okay. Yeah.
I do. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.